Hello and welcome back to Multimodal. I'm your host, Bax T Future. This is a podcast about GPT-3, multimodal AI models like DALL-E, the company OpenAI, as well as maybe its competitors like Cohere, Eleuther AI, AI21. In this podcast, I share the latest developments in this space. I may share interesting research people are working on, maybe stuff I'm working on. I share my thoughts on these products and these technologies and this research and where it could go and what it could mean for society. Sometimes I even try to make sense of this space and what happened over the past week or month and try to, describe these developments and sort of extrapolate where they could go as best as possible. I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If you've been following me on Twitter at BAKZTFuture, if you've been following this space, either the OpenAI blog or other people in the community, I'm sure you know last week was a whirlwind of a week. Today, we're going to be talking about OpenAI's new Embeddings Endpoint, and we're going to be talking about some of their fine-tuning research, which has led to a new product called, or I guess new engine called Instruct GPT. I'm very excited to talk about those two things. I'm going to share sort of a tweet that I put out a week or two ago and sort of expand on it. And somehow that tweet relates to these product announcements as well. But before we get there, I actually wanted to put out a pretty serious note in this week's episode. I don't like starting off on such a hard, intense note, but I think it is worth putting out there. So thank you again for tuning in. Let's get started. So last year, I put out an article on my Substack newsletter, bakztfuture.substack.com, where I shared my big predictions for 2022. I talked about things that mostly we'll see in the GPT-3 AI space, things that the company OpenAI could do in 2022, larger developments we'll see in this space. But towards the end of the article, I also shared in, pretty blunt terms that I'm not optimistic about both our macroeconomic as well as our geopolitical situation. In this article, I think I wrote flat out that I think the US may be looking at a dual front war between Russia over the Ukraine and potentially with China over Taiwan. I had put out this prediction, and to be honest, I put it out hoping it wouldn't happen. I sort of left it towards the end of the article because I just did not want to see that path. It felt like perhaps this kind of thing could be coming, but I sort of hoped otherwise. But I captured it in writing. You can go ahead and check it out. I'm going to include the link to that article in the YouTube description as well as the show notes for today's episode. It's starting to feel a lot like the temperature on this topic, particularly between Russia and Ukraine, is going up. It's getting very heated, and this is a situation I've been monitoring since maybe October or November of last year. It is not looking like a good situation. And, the implications of what could happen over the next week or two or month are pretty big. I'm hoping it will be nothing. I'm hoping it doesn't go anywhere. There's a lot to lose in this situation. But in any case, a lot of the defining geopolitics for the next 10, 20, maybe 50 years may be defined by what happens over the next 2 weeks or so. And, for me, I had put out the prediction. I wrote it in the article. But I had also again, this is beyond logic, reasoning. This is beyond data. I have sort of been getting goosebumps about this particular issue and topic since last year. And these kinds of goosebumps, whether it's my intuition or something, it feels a lot like that public health crisis in 2020. And so for the OG YouTube viewers who've been with me since the beginning, before I even had 1,000 subscribers, I put out a certain public health crisis YouTube projections video in January 2020, where I actually calculated the number of global cases we could see based on existing, cases and trends that we were seeing in other parts of the world. That was in January 2020. And I had meant to do it in 2019, that video, but I was just so busy. I didn't have the time to actually go ahead and, do the math and make that video. But I put it out in January 2020. The same kinds of goosebumps I got thinking, wow, the world might change entirely within a few months. I'm getting with this thing too. And I apologize for the buzzing in the background. And I also, in some of the social circles, different, signals across Twitter, mainstream media, people I know and trust, I think you're starting to feel that the conversation is starting to head there. However, I don't think most people have realized how significant what could happen over the next 2 weeks really are, how much they could change everything. It could be nothing, or it could be huge. And it's just something which is very under talked about. And so one of the purposes of this podcast is sort of open talking about, how do I see the role of this podcast? I also view this podcast partially about putting things on people's radar, putting things that I think are important, especially things that nobody is talking about. This situation is very, very serious. It's a dangerous situation. It's very tense. And, if things go in this very, very scary direction, it has a serious, serious effect on pretty much everything. And this is combined with supply chain shortages, the rising inflation, the public markets are tanking. Again, I was not hoping that last prediction would see any fruition at all. But I'm gulping, thinking, oh my goodness, we're in for a rough few months. And depending upon what happens in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so, it could be a lot worse. So anyways, just putting that on your radar. I'm still hoping for the best. I'm hoping, diplomacy will win in this scenario. And, there's always ways to work together, to collaborate. And so I'm hoping we may see something like that too. I think, that would be I could take a breather. We can go ahead and dismiss the prediction and move on with our lives. I'd rather have that scenario. So anyways, that was a very serious note. I also, if you're watching on video, you'll notice the cool new wave panels I have in the back. I've installed the soundproofing. As I mentioned, the audio quality was really bothering me over the last few months. So I'm hoping the audio quality is a little bit better to the audio listeners. I apologize for what you've been dealing with for the past few weeks. There was just too much echo. It's, a lot better now. So now we're going to get into, sort of the meat and bones of today's episode. I want to start by talking about a tweet that I put out about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. It got a fair amount of response from different people. So I tweeted, Google search results have become so bad over time that I have started using GPT-3 for straightforward, plain text answers to basic questions. And I got some interesting responses. Using GPT-3 for certain questions as well, much better than Google. Would love to see comparisons. Could you share some? Google search has always been this bad. It's GPT that has come out of age. So anyways, I don't know, and I have heard other people share this, growing hatred for Google search results, to put it plainly. But I don't know, I encourage you as well. I think Google search is this interesting phenomenon. I'm just so used to a great product, great results. I've been using it, I guess, for over 18 years, almost 20 years I've been using Google search. I just, that product has been so great. I don't even think about it, right? It's almost like a utility, that I think I've been giving them the benefit of the doubt for the past 2 to 3 years. And the quality of these search results has just gone super, super downhill. Even basic things I look up, I cannot get a clear answer. The top results are very obvious SEO, content marketing kinds of plays. And it's just hard to know what to trust, what to go by, where the answers even are for what you're looking for. And I think there's also just this weird, I don't want to get into the specifics of the vector space model, But like, the basic idea though is, just because you have words that are kind of similar doesn't actually mean what you're talking about matches what it thinks you're talking about, right? Like, context is really important. And so sometimes I think Google search has like a good job maybe triangulating some keywords, but I'm finding most of the time I'm wasting my time literally on Google search. And I never thought I'd say that. Like, I've been giving them the benefit of the doubt. I've been, thinking higher of them. They have such good loyalty and respect from me that has been built up over the last 20 years that I give them the benefit of the doubt, but it has gotten really, really bad. And so sometimes literally I just load up the OpenAI playground. Right now, it's pretty good for Q&A. It's very good for simple answers to basic questions. And in some ways, in ways that even Google is not, right? Or even if Google is, it's being manipulated by content marketing and SEO, where all these people are trying to game it. And obviously it's got so many ads, right? One of my sort of criticisms about Google, especially Google search, is at this point, their business model is based on showing people ads. And so they benefit from you typing in, seeing a results page, clicking ideally on the one first, second, or third links. And even before you click on the first and third links, you better see some ads there for different companies and different products, and you click on those, right? So that's their model. But I almost feel like the model that is possible through something like GPT-3 is obviously what's known as plain text web search engine. So what does that mean? That means you type in your search query, and instead of getting back links from Google search, you just get back the answer, right? Kind of like how Google search right now does a Wikipedia synopsis, or it paraphrases, like it sort of captures the pieces of text that may answer your search query and put them directly on the search page. I'm imagining something like purely plain text, like something maybe in a command line, or something which feels a lot more like Wikipedia. Like there's some media there, like images and video, but for the most part, you don't have to click any links. You don't have to go anywhere. It's just there, summarized, paraphrased perfectly on the page. And so it's just crazy. But I mean, so it's crazy. I'm using GPT-3 more than Google search for a lot of these kinds of queries, but also maybe, GPT-3 is compelling in that way, right? Like it can summarize things. It can paraphrase. It can maybe synthesize a lot of this information in a way Google's not doing. And at the same time, GPT-3 is cutting edge technology, whereas Google, I understand they do use machine learning as a part of their search ranking algorithm. It's been that way for a while now, but it could very well be running on the old school, the last decade version of AI technology, which is just not as good as something like GPT-3. And, maybe Google search results will evolve. I guess what I'm saying is their business model may indicate otherwise, right? Like, I'm not sure if they're incentivized to have plain text search results, to not send people to links, to paraphrase, to synthesize, like to become almost like an encyclopedia or Wikipedia or something of that sort. Even if they do have the incentives or they can make it happen, it is such a big change to their product, business model, all these core sort of assumptions that I don't know if any company would have the wherewithal to do such a dramatic shift. But it says a lot about Google's decline, this tweet, and it also says a lot about GPT-3's potential. And I'm sure, for the OG listeners and GPT-3 users, web search was one of the, classic GPT-3 cases, use cases that came out in summer 2020. Somebody had built a simple search engine where you type in stuff and it just answers it. Even right below the search box, it would just answer it, right? Which is what Google could be like, but it's not. Now, I mean, so there's one like little caveat is, I will get GPT-3 to answer, but I will also verify everything it says, I guess, back through Google or other sources, right? So maybe it's pointless in the end. I'm just not ashamed to admit it. You can't fully trust GPT-3's factual validity sometimes, but for the most part, I'm finding, it's accurate. And it's a lot more convenient than Google. And Again, I mean, the whole point of this tweet is, it says a lot about Google's decline and GPT-3's potential and the handiness of something like GPT-3. So speaking of which, so I put this out on January 18th, and then on the 25th, so about a week later, OpenAI announced a new endpoint. So introducing text and code embeddings in the OpenAI API, we are introducing embeddings, a new endpoint in the OpenAI API that makes it easy to perform natural language and code tasks like semantic search, clustering, topic modeling, and classification. Embeddings are numerical representations of concepts converted to number sequences, which makes it easy for computers to understand the relationships between those concepts. Our embeddings outperform top models in three standard benchmarks, including a 20% relative improvement in code search. So we see a couple of cool diagrams, text as vectors. Here's everything laid out here. Text similarity, text search, text code search. Text similarity models provide embeddings that capture the semantic similarity of pieces of text. These models are useful for many tasks, including clustering, data visualization, and classification. The text search models provide embeddings that enable large-scale search tasks, like finding a relevant document among a collection of documents given a text query. Embedding for the document and query are produced separately, and then cosine similarity is used to compare the similarity between the query and each document. Embedding-based search can generalize better than word overlap techniques used in classical keyword search because it captures the semantic meaning of text and is less sensitive to exact words or phrases. And then it talks about, code search models as well as examples of the embedding API currently being used. And so it was just, interesting timing. I tweeted about it that, Google search is really bad. GPT-3 is awesome. OpenAI put out this product. I'm excited to try it. To be honest, I have not spent too much time using GPT-3 for search-based applications, which is funny because, I had built my own web-based search engine in like 2017. And so I think I've been a little burnt out from this space, if I'm being honest. So I think I will give this Embeddings API a spin just to see what is the state of the art like. There was a little bit of a brouhaha. So somebody had tweeted their own findings for the Embeddings API, basically saying it's too expensive and, a simpler model, which is a lot smaller, which is cheaper to run, in his findings was it performed better. And then somebody at OpenAI also responded and came up with their own thread, basically saying a lot of the old benchmarks no longer apply. And, this is also a lot of his criticisms were, described in the paper behind the Embeddings API endpoint announcement. So a little brouhaha. I've sort of paraphrased it here. I encourage you to check it out. I may include the links in the description if you want to explore it yourself, maybe draw your own evaluations on the performance of the Embeddings API endpoint, as well as cost and all things considered. At the same time, Sam Altman, who's the CEO of Twitter, he put out the next day that, so somebody else, Boris tweeted, he's somebody else who works at OpenAI. He's very, very active on the community forums. Shout out to Boris. Our models are available to anyone who will build the next gen search tools and commercialize them effectively. And then Sam, quote tweeted it. And then he wrote, "This is one of the best shots at a new $100 billion company I can think of." And so if you don't know, Sam Altman used to be the CEO of Y Combinator, which is like the Harvard for startups, the best startup accelerator in the world. And so, putting all of this together. So my original tweet was saying Google search is really bad, right? GPT-3 is really promising. Then OpenAI a week later, they're dropped. Clearly, they've been working on this for a while. A new embeddings endpoint, which makes many tasks, important tasks in search and information retrievable, a lot more superpowered through the same technology that powers GPT-3, right? A lot more usable, a lot more friendlier. And then on top of that, the people working at OpenAI are also excited to see companies get built. And Sam is estimating that this could be, a $100 billion plus opportunity for people who leverage these search tools in new, clever, exciting ways. And then finally, I want to talk about the big, did I have any closing thoughts? My closing thoughts is for the search thing is, this could be a huge opportunity. I agree with Sam. Google is clearly broken. I don't quite know how it will pan out. Perhaps there's certain verticals in search which make more sense to offer a product than others. Maybe there's other ways you could segment the market, like a purely privacy, security focused search. Maybe there's other things as well, even beyond search, right? Like some kind of, business solution that can help them stay organized, right? Stuff like that. So anyways, this is a huge opportunity, and I'm excited to play with the API myself and maybe come up with something. I wouldn't mind starting a $100 billion company or two. And then finally, they put out another announcement. So aligning language models to follow instructions. We've trained language models that are much better at following user intentions than GPT-3, while also making them truthful and less toxic. Using techniques developed through our alignment research, these Instruct GPT models, which are trained with humans in the loop, are now deployed as the default language models on our API. And so what it's got here is the prompt says, explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old in a few sentences. So GPT-3 in the past, let's say something like Da Vinci, it would have just responded with more questions, right? Explain the theory of gravity to a 6-year-old. Explain the theory of relativity to a 6-year-old. Explain the Big Bang Theory to a 6-year-old. Explain evolution to a 6-year-old. And the new Instruct GPT, which is, fine-tuned and a lot less toxic and, it's ideally more accurate. It responded with, people went to the moon and they took pictures of what they saw and sent them back to the Earth so we could all see them. And so we can see here Instruct GPT requires less prompting, essentially. It requires less prompt design, less prompt engineering. And I think as a business move, it's very exciting to see that OpenAI has made it the default engine. That says a lot about their confidence in Instruct GPT, and as well as where things could be going for prompt design, prompt development, as well as, the future kinds of models we may see. And so then, it goes on. The resulting Instruct GPT models, GPT models are much better at following instructions than GPT-3. They also make up facts less often, which is exciting if you're using GPT-3 as a search engine, and often show small decreases in toxic output generation. We believe that fine-tuning language models with humans in the loop is a powerful tool for improving their safety and reliability, and we will continue to push in this direction. And then they got some results here. We find that Instruct GPT models are significantly preferred on prompts submitted to both the Instruct GPT and GPT-3 models on the API. This holds true when we add a prefix to the GPT-3 prompt so that it enters an instruction following mode. They got a cool sort of illustration here of how they've sort of fine-tune it and get the data set ready for Instruct GPT. They talk about limitations as well. So anyways, this is some really exciting stuff. And again, if you follow me on Twitter, I've just been asking the community in general, do you think prompt design and prompt engineering is over? Is this something we needed to do in the past that we may no longer need to do now or in the future? I'm certainly on record, like one of the big reasons I've always hated the word prompt engineering. I encourage you to check out my podcast and the newsletter article that it's like a 40-minute podcast where I'm ranting about why prompt engineering is a bad name. One of the biggest reasons I was against that name is, in theory, as AI becomes more sophisticated and smarter, basically, you should need less prompting over time, right? Like, it should just understand, what do you want? What should it look like? And so the resounding feedback I got on Twitter from, various, smart people, especially my DMs as well, was that prompt design, prompt engineering, there's no way it's over, right? And the fundamentals in prompt design are still necessary to use something like Instruct GPT, as well as the whole process of building a GPT-3 application. Like, you have to come up with the prompt, then you have to sort of probably add, even with Instruct GPT, like 1 or 2 more examples to get exactly the kinds of outputs you want. Then you still need to write the code for your application. Then you probably need to fine tune that Instruct GPT model if it's possible. And then fine tuning, getting that data set together and, training it. Like, it's still a fair amount of work, right? And so the resounding feedback I hear is no. However, I would push back a bit. I would push back a bit. This is a significant move on OpenAI's part. It says a lot about their confidence in this approach. And again, I try not to even talk about today. I'm always trying to speak like a year or 2, 5 years from now. I think the whole prompt thing, as cool as this, phenomenon is, right? I believe there's such a thing as prompt design. Some people have a knack for it. As cool as it is, the fact that you need to write a prompt does inherently slow down GPT-3's virality. Many people just prefer something like Instruct GPT, especially if it's their first time. And it lets them immediately see the things that GPT-3 is capable of, get back meaningful results. And once they've got that taste of it, then they could perhaps look into something like prompt design or engineering if they actually need it. But for now, I mean, up until this point, before, the Instruct GPT, it hasn't quite been that great, like sort of like that first example where it's asking to describe like the moon landing to a 6-year-old. GPT-3 used to do that, right? Like, it would just come up with a list of questions. And as a magic experience, that's not the best for a first-time user, right? They're like, I don't get what's going on. And then they're like, oh, I can retry it. Then they retry it. They may get their answer. They may not. And then if they don't get their answer, then they're going to ask around, how come I didn't get my answer? And then people tell them, oh, you got to learn this thing called prompt design. And so then it's like, oh, I got to learn this thing called prompt design. Then they may finally get that magic experience, right? And so this Instruct GPT is really exciting because they can get that magic experience a lot sooner, right? And once they get it, they see the value, they feel the value, then they can perhaps consider learning something like prompt design. The Instruct engines, to be clear, have been around for a while now, but even by using this current one, it seems a lot better than it did roughly a year ago. And so anyways, this is a really exciting development. OpenAI has just been executing 2 really big announcements in 1 week. My Twitter was blowing up. Things are going crazy. And it's really exciting just to see all the new offerings, all the new enhancements behind the whole OpenAI product suite. And again, I'm excited to just kickstart 2022. We're off to a great start. And so anyways, all together, I hope the audio is better this episode. Situation with Russia and Ukraine and the US, pretty tense. I'm hoping for the best. Search is an exciting space. If you're working on a GPT-3 based application or startup in the search space, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. And finally, the Embeddings API, as well as the new Instruct GPT, are really, really exciting things. And of course, I love making fun of names for different AI products. Instruct GPT, also a bad name, right? So far, GPT-3, bad name. Prompt engineering, bad name. It's worth putting out Instruct GPT, also a bad name. And so, anyways, that's it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great week. I hope you have a great day, month, evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you're up to, I hope it's awesome. Multimodal by Backseat Future is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. You can find me on my newsletter, bakztfuture.substack.com. This is a place where I share just interesting thoughts, a lot of, different things I'm thinking about, raw ideas. It's on there. Some things are better in writing than in this podcast form. So I don't even talk about it on here. I may write about it separately. I mentioned my Twitter at bakztfuture. You can follow me on Instagram, bakztfuture, and of course my YouTube. You can guess by now my YouTube channel, youtube.com/bakztfuture. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great week. Bye.